Not, yeah? Yeah, I think so. I hear the echo now. All right. So here we are for round 2. Y'all got your old crap handles and seat belts ready to buckled up, and we got a lot of information to cover, but we're going to do our best. So obviously last week we covered chapters 1 through 3, which was the beginning of the story. But if you remember, in the end of chapter 2, I talked about a 7 days and 7 nights of silence. And to use caution in that, and if I didn't say this, I'm going to say it again, where Satan attempted once by taking everything Job had to get him to curse God, and it didn't work. So then he took everything but Job's life. He took his health and all, and Job still wouldn't curse God. And then I say, you don't have to agree with me, my opinion, Satan then used the family and the wife coming up, and through her grief, trying to get Job to curse God. And Job still refused. And now there's a 7 days of silence and 7 nights of silence. And I told you, if you're focused, you're untouchable. But when you're unfocused, then you're vulnerable. Just like there's a story Eric Gilmore told of his daughter. One day they were out laying down looking up at the night sky. And she said, "Daddy, in the daytime, where'd all the stars go?" And he said, "Oh, baby, they're not going anywhere." He said, when the sun is in its rightful place, all of the lights go out. So when you're focused, the other lights are meaningless. Okay? I would say maybe it's just for me, but a slow, careful read of these chapters of the book of Job will help you in your ability to discern the voice that you're listening to help you know if it's the voice of the Lord or another voice. Okay? And I say that because, remember, the intentions of the friends when they showed up was to comfort and mourn with Job. And then they began speaking in chapter 4, and I believe this is the 4th attempt of Satan to get Job to curse God. Diving into chapter 4, we find the friend Eliphaz. So there's 3 friends, and we'll discuss them as we go through. Eliphaz, so the name itself means, and remember this will come up again. Eliphaz means my God is fine gold. Bildad is confusing by mingling and love. Zophar is rising early, sparrow crown, pleasant abode, pleasantness. Okay? You say, why are these important? They're not yet, but they will be. Okay? Hopefully, if all goes well and I get to the end point tonight, those names will be important, and I'll show you why. However, Eliphaz starts in chapter 4, and he starts in, and if you watch carefully, this is where you see that, hold up, he's trying to do something else. Something's twisted here. To try to keep going through, to go through as quickly as we can, so to speak, without falling in the details. He says to Job, starting out, if we jump to verse 6, he says it like this: "Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways? Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off?" You see what I'm saying? Like now he's saying, hey, Job, they're starting in their arguments, their dialogue, if you will, of punishment comes to those who sin against God. Blessing comes to those who remain in right standing with God. Okay? He's saying this, and he starts out by telling him that, and then this is where it gets funny. Jump to verse 12, and Eliphaz says this: Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and mine ear received a little thereof. In thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth on men. That statement will come up again later on. But anyways, fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying, pause. If you haven't caught the issue, let me explain it to you. If you bring back your biblical knowledge here to interpret this passage here and see what's going on. When God sends a messenger from God, it's typically labeled as the Spirit of the Lord, the Holy Spirit, the angel of the Lord, or an angel. Does fear come upon the individual the messenger is coming to? Yes, but what's the first words they say? Fear not. No, notice none of that's happening here. It was a form that he couldn't discern the form of, and he called it a spirit. Also, he said he received a little thereof, which tells me he didn't receive the entirety of the message. God always gives a full message, not a partial one, right? So we got to keep those things in mind, and this is why I say this will work on your discernment a little bit, okay? And because here's one of those places where when you look at commentaries, and look, I'm not smarter than they are, but I'm just telling you, be careful, because some of them glorify Eliphaz. And I read that, and I'm like, guys, we got to calm down and be careful, because he's right here, he's not to be glorified in this, okay? And you'll see in the bits of message that he did give, because he says, shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his maker? Sounds good, right? Behold, he put no trust in his servants, and his angels he charged with folly. Hold up, wait a second. When did God not trust his servants? When did he charge his angels with folly? Oh, those are the ones that followed Satan. So, yeah, but you can't, he's trying to twist the word. So you see how the message is false, the messenger was false, right? So that's where I say this is the defense for, this is Satan's last attempt to get at Job, because there was vulnerability in the people. Because what Peter said, as I told you last week, is true, that the enemy walks around like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. He's looking for the vulnerable. You watch the way lions hunt. It's in nature. They go for the vulnerable. They don't go for the strongest of the pack. They go for the weakest, right? So he goes in this way, and you've got to understand that his message leads you to that. And then if we skim through to chapter 15, looking in verses 9 and 10, right? Not 15, 5. Sorry, I am way off here. See, that's what I get for having notes. Jacks me up. We're not in 15 yet. We're in 5. He says some other things that look true, but we still have to be careful with. Like in verse 17, behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. For he maketh sore and bindeth up, he woundeth, and his hands make whole. He shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 shall no evil touch thee. Where this is not entirely untrue, but in its application, because of its direction towards Job, makes it a falsehood. Because he's saying that Job is receiving chastisement from God. We know things that they didn't know, obviously. But there is no chastisement from God here. It was permitted by God for these things to take place, but it's for the purpose of forward motion. Okay? And we'll see that forward motion as we roll through. But these friends, you got to watch, because they say some stuff, and you'll even hear people preach on these truths that they have in their passages. Look, at the end of the day, some of the things are true, but just use caution, because it doesn't mean that Eliphaz's speech is right. Okay? Sometimes people will mix the truth with lies, hoping that you miss the lie. Okay? Satan is deceitful and cunning, and he's crafty at doing that. He's really good at what he does, okay? We'll give him, that's as much credit as we can give the guy, but he's good at his job, okay? Then Job steps in, okay? Job comes in response to Eliphaz. In chapter 6 and 7. And he alludes back to what he said in chapter 3. And he takes on some of this stuff where he says in verse 8 of chapter 6, "Oh, that I might have my request, and that God would grant me the thing that I long for. Even that it would please God to destroy me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off." You see, this is that cry again from that point of despair and grief and all, right? We have to step into Job's place and not say, well, why didn't Job have faith to believe God would take him through this? Why is he still longing for death? If you were just short of death, if you felt like the next breath you took was your last and it wasn't, could you say that you would be 100% faithful and never request death from God? You see what I'm saying? So we have to cut him some slack, and we have to just watch Job work and watch God work through this and see what happens. And he says, if we jump down to 14, he acknowledges, he starts talking to the friends, okay? He starts talking to them, and he says things like this throughout. But here in verse 14, he says, "To him that is afflicted, pity should be showed from his friend, but he forsaketh the fear of the Almighty. My brethren have dealt deceitfully as a brook, and as the stream of brooks they pass away." Right? So he's already saying, why are you not here to comfort me and mourn with me? Why are you trying to make things worse? Or right out the gate, he's already saying this, okay? Then he even says this in verse 21, "For now ye are nothing. Ye see my casting down and are afraid. Did I say, bring unto me, or give me a reward for me of your substance, or deliver me from the enemy's hand, or redeem me from the hand of the mighty? Teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred." Right? So he's talking to the friends, and he's saying, hey, I didn't ask for your opinion. I didn't ask for your wisdom. I didn't ask for this. Why are you making things worse? Right? In verse 7, he says some truths, and we're going to see Job develop something that's really cool as we move through. Chapter 7, "Is there not an appointed time to man upon earth, and are not his days also like the days of an hireling?" Right? So he's understanding of the basic truths that man has a numbered day on earth, and that there is coming an end, okay? He understands that. And he goes on through, in verse 11, he says, "Therefore I will not refrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I a sea or a whale that thou settest a watch over me? When I say my bed shall comfort me, my couch shall ease my complaint. Then thou scarest me with dreams and terrifiest me through visions, so that my soul choose the strangling and death rather than my life. Now, you see what he did there? He said, look, I'm laying here in this pile of ashes, and I got my broken piece of pottery, and they're bringing me comfort. Why are you coming at me with visions and dreams and trying to increase fear on me? So he's already knowledgeable enough somewhere along the lines to know that what Eliphaz is talking about is false and that his vision was from the dark. Right? So Job says in the end of chapter 7, okay, he's speaking here. He turns his attention back and forth between the friends and to God. Okay, here he's saying, "I have sinned. What shall I do unto thee, O thou preserver of men? Why hast thou set me as a mark against thee, so that I am a burden to myself? And why dost thou not pardon my transgression? Take away mine iniquity. For now shall I sleep in the dust, and thou shalt seek me in the morning, but I shall not be." Right? He's crying out to God. Look, if I've sinned, I'll say I've sinned. But show me what to do next so this can be relieved, even if it's through death. Right? So then at that, the next friend, old Bildad, shows up. Okay? Now, we can give you a corny joke about Bildad because he's the shoe height, so he's the shortest man in the Bible because he was only a shoe height. Right? So Bildad comes up, and he's the least talkative of the bunch. Okay? His speeches are short and, I would say, sweet, but they're not. Bildad jumps in 8, and we see his view of God, and we see this view of God throughout the three friends, okay? Starting in verse 3, he says, and again, just watch it. "Doth God pervert judgment, or doth the Almighty pervert justice? If thy children have sinned against him, and he have cast them away for their transgression, if thou wouldest seek unto God betimes and make thy supplication to the Almighty, if thou wert pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee and make the habitation of the righteousness of your righteousness prosperous." Do you see the problem with this, though it starts out good? Because God's not a perverter of justice or judgment, right? And there is a possibility that he will cast away for sin, right? I mean, he flooded the earth because of sin, right? But then Bildad says, if you would seek God out, and then he goes so far as to say, if you were pure and upright. Now, hold on. We know something they don't know. Job was described in the opening verse, but also twice by God, as one who was pure, upright, fears God, and eschews evil. Right? Yet Bildad just said, if you were pure and upright. Now hold on. If you're hearing from God, you're not going to call a man unpure and not upright that God calls pure and upright. Right? So you got to watch those things. But also, the biggest giveaway, if you cry out to him, he would awake. Oh, God don't sleep. What do you mean awake? We ain't got to wake him up. You know, he's not one of these made-up gods that has a bedtime. He's the creator of the universe. He's beyond time and all those things. Sleep is unnecessary to him. Right? So if you watch these things that they're saying and they're going that, and this is the route they continue to go, that, hey, Job, you're suffering because you've sinned. There's no other reason. There's no other reason for suffering. Suffering is the result of sin, and that's it. There are no other answers. That's their opinion, right? And I'll reiterate what I said about Job being in the wisdom or poetry books. And the majority of them seem to point toward, do this, God will bless you. Do this, God will curse you. The book of Job says, hold up, wait a minute, that's not the way this works, right? Because Job did everything you were supposed to do to receive the blessings, and it still came upon him, right? Job did everything that he was supposed to do to receive the blessing, yet the curse still came upon him, right? It's not a defiance of the rules and laws of God, but it's a deeper understanding and defining of the ways of God. Okay? So coming to chapter 9, Job responds to this one, right? And in chapter 9, there's some pretty cool things that happens. We can see as you read through here that Job has an understanding of God that we wouldn't expect from someone who doesn't personally know God, that's only heard of God. Okay? Verse 11, lo, he goeth by me, and I see him not. He passeth on also, but I perceive him not. Behold, he taketh away, who can hinder him? Who will say unto him, what doest thou? If God will not withdraw his anger, the proud helpers do stoop under him. How much less shall I answer him and choose out my words to reason with him? Right? Look, this is the other thing Job says that's just fascinating, okay? Watch in verse 16. If I had called and he had answered me, yet would I not believe that he had hearkened unto my voice. Job's idea is, if I had spoken and for whatever reason God responded, Job says, I wouldn't believe that it was because I was the one who called. Job had no understanding of, at this point for sure, Job had no understanding of, you are the creation of God. And God will run to you when you love him. He will fight for you and stand for you. And he will hear you when you call and he will answer. Job didn't know that. So Job's saying, if I called and God would have responded, there would have been some other reason for it than my voice. Okay? And it's just a humble approach. It's not Job being holier than thou, but it's Job being humble enough to understand that I'm not the focus of God. Okay? And he also, in 19, he says, if I speak of strength, lo, he is strong. And if of judgment, who shall set me a time to plead? If I justify myself, mine own mouth shall condemn me. If I say I am perfect, it shall also prove me perverse. Now, how many of us are quick to not defend ourselves in a situation? Not quick to defend ourselves. Most of us, if somebody comes up and says, whoa, hold on a minute, I did not. Look, I'm not bashing it. I'm as guilty as everybody on that, okay? But how does it make you feel? Like this is where the challenges come in for me for Job, where I love and hate the book. Here's a man that has no personal relationship with God, yet he can say with confidence, if I justify myself, I condemn myself. How does that make you feel? Thinking back to the last time you defended yourself when you didn't have to. You see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but I want you to see the challenges that are here, but that we need to take from and to understand that God was trying to tell us a lot more than some random stuff about suffering. There's a lot more being taught here than that. Okay? Job come on down, and Job says this. This is another one of those points that's very important. You will see it again. Okay? Verse 32. For he is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, and we should come together in judgment. Neither is there any daysman betwixt us that might lay his hand upon us both. Let him take his rod away from me, and let not his fear terrify me. Then would I speak and not fear him, but it is not so with me. Now, a daysman, now I'm using King James, and I'm not as familiar with the other translation, so I don't know what other word they use there for daysman, but it's essentially a middleman. Okay? It's mediator, right? So you have to understand that term and understand that placement, that there's someone that you go to talk to. Like, even if you get a speeding ticket, 9 times out of 10, you don't walk into the courthouse and go straight up to the judge first thing and plead your case. Most times you talk to either a lawyer or the magistrate before you ever talk to the judge, right? So just understand that term, and it is a judicial term, and that's used a lot. But understand that, remember that, file that away, it's coming back, okay? So Job is saying these things, and he's coming out, and then in the end of chapter 10, he pleads with God. Again, in the end, he pleads for death because it's where Job sees that relief resides. Okay? Right now, still, and it's good to understand, Job's not looking to the future that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, he's like, look, the only comfort I know of comes after death, so let me go, God. Okay? And then the other friend speaks in chapter 11, old Zophar, right? So, starting in verse 13 is where we see his suggestion and accusation of Job is in chapter 11, verse 13. And he goes along those same lines that we heard Bildad say, and Eliphaz will say the same thing again. But he says, if you prepare your heart and stretch out your hands toward him, if iniquity be in thine hand, put it far away, and let not wickedness dwell in thy tabernacles. For then shalt thou lift up thy face without spot, yea, thou shalt be steadfast, and shalt not fear. Because thou shalt not forget thy misery, and remember, it is waters that pass away. And thine age shall be clearer than the noonday, thou shalt shine forth. Thou shalt be as the morning, and thou shalt be secure, because there is hope. Yea, thou shalt dig about thee, and thou shalt take thy rest in safety. Also thou shalt lie down, and none shall make thee afraid. Yea, many shall make suit unto thee, but the eyes of the wicked shall fail, and they shall not escape, and their hope shall be as the giving up of the ghost. Now again, some of this sounds good. Some of this will be reiterated later in a better light. Okay? So not to say that it's all wrong, but then he goes in and he closes out shoving Job in the category with the wicked. Right? Now again, they don't know, but because of their vulnerability, they've been influenced by other voices, and they're speaking in regards to those. They're trying to analyze the situation and read from it what they see, right? So then in chapter 12, Job responds again, right? And here, he makes a statement in verse 12 that is important to remember. Eliphaz will make this statement again, and then we'll see it again later, okay? It's one of those statements that's threaded throughout that we have to acknowledge, okay? He says, with the ancient is wisdom, and in length of days understanding. With him is wisdom and strength. He hath counsel and understanding. Behold, he breaketh down, and it cannot be built again. He shutteth up a man, and there can be no opening. You thought Jesus said that first, didn't you? Sorry to burst your bubble. Well, he did, because he's the Word, but behold, he withholdeth the waters, and they dry up. Also, he sendeth them out, and they overturn the earth. With him is strength and wisdom. The deceived and the deceiver are his. So he had an understanding of who God was in the hierarchy, if you will. If you want to call it a hierarchy, he understood God's place above all things, that all things below him belong to him, including the enemy. Right? So then we jump over to 13, walking through Job's stuff here, okay? He hits the friends again, okay? And he says, lo, mine eye hath seen all this, mine ear hath heard and understood it. What ye know, the same do I know also. I am not inferior to you. Surely I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to reason with God. But ye are forgers of lies, ye are all physicians of no value. Oh, that ye would altogether hold your peace, and it should be your wisdom. Understand, that's more of a rebuke than a friendly request. Okay? Then, so he goes on through this, and he makes another statement that's threaded throughout Scripture again. And he speaks of God saying, he will surely reprove you if you do secretly accept persons. And he's talking to the friends. He's saying there, you will receive punishment from God if you accept persons. He says secretly, right? James 2:1 opens up, brethren, have not the faith of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect of persons. So if you're going to treat this person better than that person because of what they're wearing, God don't like it, and he will give you a whooping for it. Okay? He's saying, don't do that. It's unacceptable. Okay? Then he says to his friends, hold your peace, let me alone that I may speak, and let come on me what will. Wherefore do I take my flesh in my teeth and put my life in mine hand? Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. But I will maintain mine own ways before him. He also shall be my salvation, for an hypocrite shall not come before him. Where did that come from? Job was ready to die just moments earlier. All of a sudden, he says, hey guys, y'all need to hush, because look, I'm going to trust God through it all. Even if he chooses to take me out, I'm going to hold faithful to him. Right? Beautiful statement. People love it. And what's not to love about it, okay? It's a hard truth to make a lifestyle, but it's a truth that we need to strive to make a lifestyle, right? To have that much trust in God. And then he says this in verse 20. These are the other things that you need to remember. They're going to come up again, okay? Only do not two things unto me. Then will I not hide myself from thee. Withdraw thine hand far from me, and let not thy dread make me afraid. Then call thou, and I will answer. Or let me speak, and answer thou me. How many are mine iniquities and sins? Make me to know my transgression and my sin. Right? So he's crying out like David did. long before David ever cried out about it. He's saying, look, God, if I'm in this suffering position because of sin, then God, find me out and show me. He's longing to do the proper acts toward forgiveness. But he doesn't know what to do because he doesn't know what he's done to get there. Right? So he's pleading for that. Then we jump to chapter 14. And one of my favorite passages is here. Probably not my favorite, but one of my favorites. He talks about life and men, and then he says this in verse 7. For there is hope of a tree, if it be cut down, that it will sprout again, and that the tender branch thereof will not cease, though the root thereof wax old in the earth, and the stock thereof die in the ground. Yet through the scent of water it will bud and bring forth boughs like a plant. In comparison to life, you can go read some of the besieging stories in the stories of Kings and Chronicles and stuff. And the instructions to those besieging the city were to cut down all the trees but the fruit-bearing trees, because in those is the life of men. Because if you're besieging a city, it's taking time, and you're cutting that city off so their food supply is short. But if you're not careful, you'll cut your own food supply off. But if you leave the fruit trees, you still have food source, and you have sustainment for the battle ahead. Right? But he says this about a tree. Have you ever seen this in real life? Like, it's a pretty cool scene to see. How about Job knew something? He knew a truth. Somehow he heard a truth. Oh, wait, he was focused in that 7 days of silence. He was having another conversation that's not written with somebody other than the three friends. And he knew, yeah, I've been cut off. But hope remains that new growth will come. And all it takes is the scent of water. How awesome is that? You might say to yourself, well, water don't generally smell, and if it does, it's probably not worth drinking. Right. So let's dive a little deeper. Let's get below the surface. Water in the Old Testament is a representation of the Holy Spirit. So what I've said in the past, if you're somewhere near somebody that you know is full of the Spirit, and the Spirit is moving mightily in them, and you're over here, Lord, are you going to use me again? What's going on? You know what? They got the Spirit. Just walk over there and get you a scent of the water. Come on. Y'all with me? Just get you a scent of the water and allow the new growth to sprout from you. Okay? So what it's saying, it's beautiful, right? How did Job know it? Again, he was having another conversation that's not written. Okay? Because then he says in verse 14, if a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my appointed time will I wait till my change come. Thou shalt call, and I will answer thee. Thou wilt have a desire to the work of your hands. How awesome is that, guys? Think about this. Again, Job doesn't have, he's building, off scene, he's building a personal relationship with God that he didn't have. He's got to be. Because how else does he know this? You say, what do you mean? No, are we the work of God's hands? Ephesians 2:10 tells us we are his workmanship. Here, Job says, you, O God, will have a desire to the work of your hands. That's why I tell people all the time, and I've told the youth this multiple times when I was with them, talking about prayer. Just talk to God. It doesn't matter whether it's a pretty vagrant prayer or none of that matters. Just talk to him. You're the work of his hands. He loves the sound of your voice. So talk. If Job knew it, we ought to know it all the better. Chapter 15, our old buddy Eliphaz speaks back up. And he shows some of his true colors. Verse 9, he says, "What knowest thou that we know not? What understandest thou which is not in us? With us are both the gray-headed and very aged men, much elder than thy father." How you like that? Hey, Job, you're talking all this crazy stuff like you know something we don't know. Man, we know more than you. We're older than your daddy. We know a lot more than you. Stop trying to make yourself better than us. No. That's not what Job said. Job already acknowledged with the aged is wisdom. So you see where the attack comes in? So you see how the enemy's feeding the mind? Like, oh, he's better than you. He's better than you. Oh, no, he ain't better than me. Why are you saying you're better than me? No, stop. Quit giving him place, right? So this is the way the friends are approaching these things. Job comes back in chapter 16 again. I knew we wouldn't make it through all this. Give me just a few more minutes, and let's get through if we can get through chapter 19, we'll be good. I think I can do it in 10, 15 minutes, and then we'll pick back up, and we'll move through the rest of it at the next week, okay? But I want to get through chapter 19 because it's important to get through this week. In 16, Job comes up and he says, in verse 4, "I also could speak as ye do, if your soul were in my soul's stead. I could heap up words against you and shake mine head at you, but I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the moving of my lips would assuage your grief." You see what he's saying there? He's saying, I understand your position, and I could do the same thing if our shoes were switched, but they're not. But I also want to tell you that if our shoes were switched, I would be the comforter that I desire, rather than the antagonist that you are being. And another key thing to note in chapter 17, near the end, he says in 15, "And where is now my hope? As for my hope, who shall see it?" Right? So he's going back and forth in this, and he's like, for a moment we see a glimpse of hope, and then we see Job back in his state of what's going on. And this is where I think there's a conversation going on, and he's being brought a little further and a little further each time. Right? Verse 18, the little guy Bildad shows up. And again, here, he just tries to beat down the simple idea that they hold to, that, dude, you're suffering because you're wicked. That's all this guy's got. Okay? Like he speaks one more time, and all this guy's got is, Job, come on, you know you're wicked. You got to be wicked because you're suffering. His argument never changes. Okay? Sure, maybe y'all know somebody like that in your life. Their argument never changes. Their viewpoint won't change. They're stubborn as a rock. Right? Look, we got to hold out hope for those people. Okay? We can't just write them off. Okay? Unfortunately, we got to hold out hope for them, right? So then, chapter 19 is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I really don't, up to this point, maybe you could have an argument and say, nah, Job could have known that. because he didn't have a relationship with God. Okay, whatever, maybe you win. Here, this is all God. If it's not God, then Satan's a truth teller. That's all there is to it. Job's running through. If you're following along, watch with me in chapter 19. Jump to verse 21 and try to follow along with me. Job says this in chapter 19. Have pity upon me. Have pity upon me, O ye my friends, for the hand of God hath touched me. Why do you persecute me as God, and are not satisfied with my flesh? But ye should say, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? Be ye afraid of the sword, for wrath bringeth the punishments of the sword, that ye know there is a judgment. Now I know you're asking yourself, why not skip 23 through 27? Hang on. But did you notice that the flow didn't stop? Did you notice that the flow is almost perfect from verse 22 to 28? Watch. I'm going to try to do this, and I know I got a mic on, so I'll be careful. I think it came across with a lot more frailty than I can give. I'm not a good actor. But there's a lot more. Imagine Job, weak, hard to breathe, just shy of death, speaking to his friends, and he says, why do you persecute me as God, and are not satisfied with my flesh? Oh, that my words were written in a book. You say, hold up, why don't you get loud? Watch. That they were graven with an iron pen and lead in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eyes shall behold, and not another, though my reins be consumed within me. You tell me God's not speaking to that man, and I'll tell you, you're full of crap. Okay? You tell me, how does that make you feel? When in the middle of his suffering, he probably rises from the ground in that moment with Holy Spirit power that he's never felt before, and he speaks of a living Redeemer. How awesome is that? And let me give you a little inside scoop here if you didn't catch it in what he just said. He's not talking of the Jesus of the Gospels. He's talking of the Jesus of Revelation. Because he said in the latter day, he will stand upon the earth. That's not the Gospels, y'all. Yeah, our Redeemer lives. But that day too, we will say, our Redeemer lives. And he will prove to the world that he is alive. He will prove to the world that Easter is not a lie. Right? How awesome is that that's tucked away in the book of Job in the chapters 4 through 31 that nobody ever reads. Matter of fact, they don't read 32 through 41 either. Hardly. They read a couple of them here and there, but they don't read through to dig in and get the nuggets that are there and learn what God is trying to teach them. If this was the first book written and you think all he had to tell you was about suffering, then why did he speak of the Redeemer who lives? Come on. Right? It's so cool to see these things happening in Job and to see him coming into relationship with God. Slowly but surely, he's coming in, okay? Now look, obviously this is a lot of ground to cover and it takes a lot of time, and I apologize for not getting through it all, but we will pick up in 20 and we'll do our best to move quickly, and we'll get through hopefully all the way through 41 next week, okay? But if not, we'll push it out, and we'll make it through by the 4th week. We'll be done, okay? But I wanted to get to that tonight because it's pretty awesome when you teach through the book of Job, and it's either the Sunday of Easter or the Wednesday before Easter, and you get to mention the living Redeemer. How cool is that? If that's not a God thing, I don't know what is. So, let's close in prayer. Dear Lord, I come to you thanking you for this day, thanking you for this opportunity.